So basically, my mom is Kellyanne Conway. She works for Donald Trump, and she just tweeted that she is leaving the White House. And my dad tweeted that he's leaving the Lincoln Project, which is basically Republicans against Trump. So they're leaving their jobs and like whatever, which is like for me. So I tweeted about my emancipation yesterday, which is kind of just a coincidence. Which is really frustrating because my parents were talking about divorce and they were supposed to get divorced, but I'm assuming that now they're not because they're scared of me emancipating myself, which is really unfair, but I guess that's life. So and now their case is going to be a lot stronger against mine because, you know, they left for family reasons. But I can tell you, being their daughter, they don't give a shit. Like, they don't give a shit. My dad doesn't care about me. He's never cared about me. He probably doesn't even know my middle name, which is really sad, but it's true. You know, he never really cared about me my whole life. He always belittled me when I was younger. My dad physically abused me a lot, right here in this very room. And my mom, the same thing with my mom. You know, my mom got me arrested. You know, she's very, very physically abusive, very, very verbally abusive. I've been belittled and badgered my entire life, and I just said this to them, you know.
But I gotta get to this. There's a whole chapter in the book, which you know I've read.
Yes.
But George doesn't tweet. When he first tweeted, you thought he'd been hacked.
Yes, I did. I literally did, because Sean Spicer came to me and said, did you know about this? And it was a George Conway tweet 5 days after George had taken his name out of consideration for a very big job he had accepted with President Trump to head up the civil division of the Department of Justice. George had already gone to see his office. He was already interviewing staff for that position. He was all in like I was for Trump Pence. And I said to Sean, but George doesn't tweet. You know, in 2016, known as the year of the tweet, George Conway sent 0 tweets. He's now sent over 100,000. He can change his mind about Donald Trump. This is a free country. George owes no allegiance to a political party or a presidential candidate.
George Conway, you take a look at him. Just take a look at that guy. The man's a stone cold loser. So they should not call it the Lincoln Project. It's not fair to Abraham Lincoln, a great president. They should call it the Losers Project. Okay.
What if I told you Donald Trump didn't just divide a nation, wrecked a marriage, shattered a family, and left a teenage daughter begging fuel to listen before George Conway ever appeared on television to expose Trump's failures? He watched something far worse unfold at home. His wife Kellyanne Conway was Trump's most loyal defender, George one of his loudest critics. Their love story became a battlefield, their home a war zone, and at center of it all was Trump, whose toxic politics didn't just break, broke people the cost of speaking truth. Wasn't just media backlash for George, the price was his marriage, and as Claudia Conway took exposing the emotional fallout from her parents' political war, one truth became unavoidable: Trump didn't just fail as a president, he failed as a symbol. He sold illusion of greatness but left Ben ruins. This isn't just a political story, it's the story of how Donald Trump tore a family apart, one lie at a time.
One of the enduring mysteries of the political world has been how longtime Trump advisor Kellyanne Conway and her husband, George Conway, who became a vociferous critic of Donald Trump, survived the Trump presidency and beyond. Well, now she's out promoting a book about her time in the White House, the last chapter of which starts with this line: "Democracy will survive, America will survive, George and I may not survive." So, of course, you can guess the very first topic broached during her visit to The View was this.
I think what happened with George is, to make very clear, George does not owe fealty or loyalty to Donald Trump or any political ideology. The vows were to me to love, honor, and cherish.
All right, we get the vows, but George regularly and very publicly taunted her boss. But she says, still, she could not have done it without him.
And I would not have been able to be Donald Trump's campaign manager to the level I was had George not said, "You are taking your shot and I will help more with the kids and around the house." I have watched men in the Republican consultancy dismiss and denigrate and deride you for years. This guy can actually win with you. Go take your shot.
So he initially supported her and she took the shot. And soon thereafter, George started taking his shots, assailing Trump day after day.
I think the public nature of it was so jarring to me because of the many things I appreciate and value about George. Many things I always appreciate about George is he's brilliant and he always kept his counsel and he's privately brilliant. Now it became publicly bombastic. But George turned on Trump, which would be okay, except it took on this whole folk hero syndrome with the mainstream media.
All right, it was just the folk hero stuff with the media that made it an issue. Now, some say that golf can become the other woman, but for Kellyanne Conway, it was Twitter.
And then came Claudia. Their daughter didn't just lay vine that ideological minefield she detonated it on. TikTok Claudia Conway morphed into a whistleblower of sorts, airing out her family's dysfunction with teenage defiance and surgical precision. Posted emotional videos accusing her parents of gaslighting and hypercrisidreging their personal battles into federal spotlight. Suddenly, the Conway family wasn't just a political metaphor, they were a modern tragedy unfolding in real time, with Claudia playing the role of the accidental truth teller.
Trump tweeted out, "Because of my strong focus on the China virus, including scheduled meetings on vaccines, our economy, and much else, I won't be able to be in New York to throw out the opening pitch for the Yankees." Claudia retweeted this and replied, 1. China virus is racist. 2. Vaccines should not be capitalized. 3. The Yankees probably didn't want you anyways. Attacking his political views and his grammatical errors all in one foul swoop. Doing the Lord's work. While traveling around the US, Trump tweeted, "Great to be in Texas," and Claudia fired back with, "Great to be in a historically red state in which you're behind in the polls." And President Trump tweeted a few days ago, "If Congress doesn't bring fairness to big tech, I will do it myself with executive orders. It has been all talk and no action for years." To which obviously Claudia clapped back with, "Okay, Sparky, settle down. Do you know what we are sick and tired of? Our racist, homophobic, tyrannical, golfing idiot of a president."
Now, Kellyanne has been used by many times for the White House's agenda or the Republican agenda by Trump for Fox News and other things. So it's funny that her daughter's going against everything she's done.
When George Conway stepped onto national television with ackling calm, no one expected for works. And that's exactly why, if it like a nuclear strike, he didn't raise his voice, he didn't gesture wildly. Instead, he peeled Trump's legacy back layer by layer, exposing the rot beneath gold. One by one, he listed Trump's humiliating failures, the casinos, theater lines, the fraudulent businesses. There was no venom in his tone, just methodical coldness. It wasn't political rhetoric, it was a post-mortem. What made Conway's approach devastating wasn't the content, it was the delivery. He spoke like a surgeon dissecting a cadaver, not a pundit hurling insults. He gave the audience no drama, no hyperbole, just brutal facts. Trump Airlines bankrupt, Trump vodka market failure, Trump University a $25 million fraud settlement, and he delivered each line like a line item on a spreadsheet. It stripped Trump of his most sacred armor, his brand. Conway didn't destroy Trump with rage, he suffocated him with truth. Predictably, Trump exploded long before the broadcast. Even Wrapped insiders described a scene of chaos. Inside Mar-a-Lago, Trump was pacing, shouting, lashing out at aides. Social media lit up with furious all-caps tweets. George Conway is a jealous failure, worst husband ever. But tantrum only validated Conway's condescending. These weren't new revelations. Trump's failures were public record, but when laid out so clinically, someone once inside the circle, it stripped the emperor not just of clothes but of credibility.
Donald Trump, we know, is basically a Matryoshka doll, how do you say that, of lies and mendacity. Basically, he'll lie, then he'll lie about lying, then he'll lie about lying about lying, and then he'll lie about lying about lying about lying. And that's what he does all the time. And that's what he's doing here.
The fallout was immediate, and telling Trump's inner circle, usually focused on controlling headlines or preparing legal defenses, turned their attention to soothing the president's ego. Staff reportedly scrambled to print out supportive social media posts to calm him down the campaign, instead off-repping for rallies or policy pushes, now playing damage control from a segment that didn't include a single Conway hadn't gone for the throw, had simply turned on the lights, and that was the brilliance of it. Conway never raised a fist, he held up a mirror. His strategy was surgical, let the audience see what's been in plain sight all along. His message was simple: Trump is not the mogul he claims to be, he is not the genius businessman. He is a walking contradiction, a collapsing brand propped up by bluster. And Conway's dissection landed with the force of gospel because it wasn't emotional, it was forensic.
You don't want to diagnose him, but I think if you look at the diagnostic criteria for narcissistic personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder, he fits every single one of them. It's like the criteria were made to describe him. And I think what we saw with this tweet yesterday is that last final collapse of Donald Trump's mental state. I mean, you think about it, those were like 50, 60, 70,000 people in the aggregate in five rallies in different states. That's loopier than saying that the moon landings were staged, because there were tens of thousands of people were there. To think that is crazy, and to try to sell it to people is just as crazy. He's done. His brain is fried.
The Jewishation couldn't have been starker while Conway remained unbothered Al-Mosbered. Trump raged like a cartoon villain losing his grip on reality. The stark contrast was mesmerizing. Conway's deadpan delivery made Trump's reaction seem not just overblown but irrational. For a man obsessed with appearing strong, Trump looked frail, shaken by a man who hadn't even raised his voice. The long-term consequences weren't just political, they were psychological inside death. Trump campaign paranoia began to creep in. Who else would turn? Who else had receipts? And Conway, he stepped back into the shadows, his silence speaking volumes. He didn't need a follow-up segment. The damage had been done.
This is Donald Trump leading the Republican Party off the cliff. This is a man for whom there is no bottom, and Republicans are just afraid to call him out. He's saying we're in the middle of this war where Putin, who can't be trusted for a moment, who murders political opponents, who slaughters women and children, and Donald Trump is focused on what? Himself, because he wants to get revenge for losing the 2020 election. He says, okay, let's see their dirt on Hunter Biden. I wonder someday that maybe we won't have a president in Russia who actually acts in the best interest of the Russian people and behaves himself before the world. Maybe President Navalny. I mean, pray to God that somehow that could happen. And maybe we'll see the files on Donald Trump. I think those would be interesting.
Meanwhile, the Conway household felt the Quacquecalian grew more reclusive. Claudia's post got darker. George remained steadfast but distant. The political had come deeply, irreversibly personal, and what had begun as a national discussion about Trump's leadership became for one family a private reckoning with truth, betrayal, and identity. In the end, this wasn't just another cable news feud, it was a carefully calibrated dismantling. America's loudest illusion, Trump sucks his power and dominance. Conway exposed failure, weakness, and insecurity through attacks but through surgical clarity. The man who once shouted over the media was undone by a whisper, and perhaps that's the cruel poetry of it all. Trump's empire wasn't brought down by scandal or revolution, it was unraveled by a husband defending his own principles, willing to burn down Thefficade even if it meant torching his own home. In the process, that's not just political commentary, that's Greek tragedy in a MAGA hat.
Tara Schreckman wants to know from you, George, do you expect Trump to target you and other staff of the Lincoln Project? And if so, do you have a defense plan?
I don't have a defense plan other than whatever he pulls up is going to be meritless. My finances are simple. It won't, I don't fear him. And I think one of the things that that people don't quite understand about Trump, but they really should, is the fact that he's a bully and he wants to pick on people who won't fight back.
The critics pounced. George's defiance was praised in liberal circles, but many questioned whether it was worth Thepris. How noble is dissent if it destroys your daughter's peace? Kellyanne was lambasted for continuing to defend Trump, even as her family unraveled. Claudia's raw posts, tear-stained and emotionally loaded, were dissected like public policy statements. Was she being exploited? Was this a rebellion or a cry for rescue? For the first time in American politics, a teenage girl's bedroom became the front line of a family's political and moral disintegration. At its core, the Conway scallops wasn't just a marital rift, it was a cultural fault line. These were two high-functioning professionals bound by intellect but broken by ideologically, and once confessed that Georgia's public criticism of her boss felt like a betrayal more profound than infidelitito. Her each tweet was a dagger to the heart. Not just politically but personally. For George, staying silent means surrendering to a moral failure. Household wasn't just divided, it was bleeding out one soundbite at a time. Trump's influence didn't just destabilize Washington, it scorched thievery family tied closest to his inner circle.
I'm going to read some of the headlines that come up when your name pops up. 15-year-old Claudia Conway wants emancipation from her mother. Claudia Conway breaks silence. Claudia Conway explains why she became a Playboy bunny. Claudia Conway shares argument with mom Kellyanne on TikTok. Kellyanne Conway's daughter is not your resistance hero. She's a 15-year-old expressing frustration with her family. How American Idol used Claudia Conway. Kellyanne Conway praised by gay daughter as LGBTQ plus champion. The list goes on and on and on.
Regarding my mom, which was, a private thing. It didn't have to be as publicized as it was. These news outlets were reaching out to me, and before you know it, I was on Fox News. I was on CNN, without my consent, really. And so after all of that happened, you're 15, you're at the beach with your friends. I was like, is this a good thing or a bad thing? You don't know because you've never really been thrusted into this the way I was. But most of these stories are just people trying to exploit a teenager.
The critics pounced. George's defiance was praised in liberal circles, but many questioned whether it was worth Thepris. How noble is dissent if it destroys your daughter's peace? Kellyanne was lambasted for continuing to defend Trump, even as her family. Unraveled. Claudia's raw posts, tear-stained and emotionally loaded, were dissected. Like public policy statements, was she being exploited? Was this a rebellion or a cry for rescue? For the first time in American politics, a teenage girl's bedroom became the front line of a family's political and moral disintegration. At its core, the Conway scallops wasn't just a marital rift, it was a cultural fault line. These were two high-functioning professionals bound by intellect but broken by ideologically, and once confessed that Georgia's public criticism of her boss felt like a betrayal more profound than infidelitado. Her each tweet was a dagger to the heart. Not just politically but personally. For George, staying silent means surrendering to a moral failure. Household wasn't just divided, it was bleeding out one soundbite at a time. Trump's influence didn't just destabilize Washington, it scorched thievery family tied closest to his inner circle.